agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to the Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by Cleveland area attorney and Republican factotum Jay Carson.
Hey, Mike. Good afternoon. Usually it's morning, but afternoon.
It's kind of a weird thing. We're recording this actually on Friday afternoon because, well, Kristen was originally scheduled to join me today, but she had a last-minute thing. And as he has often done in the past, Jay has, he ridden to the rescue exactly. But
I'm here when America needs me.
There you go. There you go. So thanks a lot, Jay. Also, thanks to our supporters who have increased their level of support during these pretty rough times. That's Peter, Kalina, and Shelley, as well as to our newest supporters, Kimberly, Jake, Andrew, Brian, and Gabriel. It's really been gratifying to see all the support we have gotten on this show from you, and it means a lot to us. Thanks so much. And if you're not a supporter yet, and if what we do here matters to you, and you are in a position to help us out, hey, that would be great, especially now when our ad revenue has, completely dried up. And as a supporter, you get access to a full-length bonus show each week, as well as other things at different levels of support. And to check it all out, you can just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. Sometimes a monthly support pledge is just too much of a commitment. We also have PayPal, and you'll find the support link for one-time PayPal at politicsguys.com/support. And we also put these links in our show notes. And finally, if you do want to get our midweek bonus show, but you just can't afford to financially support the show right now, not a problem. Just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will make sure you get access to everything we're putting out. Okay, Jay, so I want to actually backtrack a little bit to start off. We normally don't do this, and this isn't exactly a retraction.
You usually start up asking me how I'm doing.
But that's, did I not do that?
No.
Oh my God.
No.
How are you doing, Jay?
I'm almost $3 trillion better than I was this morning.
Yeah. I'm having a rough time of it because I refuse to get a haircut until I can go into a place without a mask or weird distancing things. So I'm pretty much just going to end up, I'm halfway to, my goal is kind of Arthur Schopenhauer, but I think I'm going to end up with Art Garfunkel, unfortunately. And there's not a hell of a lot I can do about that, but I am standing firm in my resolve here. So, but anyway, last week, you remember we discussed the new Title IX rules, sexual harassment and so forth. And
yeah, that rings a bell.
Yeah, well, when we were talking about the rules themselves, I felt like we didn't really disagree on the rules themselves. And, and in fact, I'm actually on a governing board of a university, my own, Northern Kentucky University, and the faculty in their infinite wisdom elected me to that position. And most of the other folks are, appointed by the governor. But if something like this came before me as the representative, of the university for policy and so forth, I wouldn't have any problems basically approving what I understand the Department of Education's regulations to be. Now, there are almost 2,000 pages of them, so I'm obviously, glossing over a few things. But in general, and the issue I was trying to raise when we talked wasn't related to the policy itself, but to how it was mandated. And my point was that the federal government here is using its, colossal fiscal power to basically force the policy on every institution. And maybe that's okay in the end, but I thought it was an important point to raise because, I don't have to tell you, Jay, since the New Deal, the federal government has used fiscal federalism and all kinds of other things to essentially dictate to the states in all sorts of areas. And
yeah, it's called, the spending power.
There you go. And
meaning, if the government's going to give you money, the government can attach strings to that money.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the sense where the states don't feel they have much of an alternative. And that's why I wanted to bring that up, because it seemed to me to potentially represent a conflict, maybe for some conservatives who, of course, believe that universities have gone too far in favoring, alleged victims over, those they're accusing of sexual misconduct. But at the same time, believing that the federal government goes too far in imposing its will on states and private businesses and so forth. And that's what I was trying to get at. But based on listener feedback, I don't think I did a very good job of it, essentially. And I guess I wanted to bring it up to you because as a conservative, and I think you believe both of those things, there's maybe a little bit of a tension there. Maybe more even for you than there would be for me.
I'm not tense at all about it.
Okay.
No, I think I understood what you were getting at, right? You were saying, listen, if the federal government can do these impose, I mean, I could be kind of play with words here and say impose due process on universities. They could also impose other processes on private businesses, and that I, as a conservative, would typically object to something like that of the government telling private businesses what they can and can't do. But that I am applauding this step regarding public universities. Now, I think, look, I guess what a consistency is a hobgoblin of shallow minds.
Maybe another way to look at it, Jay, is not all slopes are. Yeah, there you go. Well, I mean, not all slopes are slippery, or some slopes are slipperier than others, basically. And so, that's kind of where I come down on this, I think. And so, part of the reason I think this was confusing is that I generally don't do the devil's advocate thing. I just generally have my position and I just plow right ahead. And that was confusing. So when I got, listeners saying, well, you don't care about due process rights for people accused of crimes, it's like, whoa, I totally didn't mean to say that. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up. And also something I
don't believe in a governmentally enforced due process.
Well, I mean, I don't even know that I would say that, obviously, but I think, this is a point that we raise in other ways on the show when you and I talk a lot, is that sometimes we can be for outcomes, but not necessarily for the process through which they were achieved, basically. We don't necessarily believe that the end justifies the means. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And that's kind of what I was getting at. I think, in the end, I come down with you feeling that the end is important enough that it justifies this. And it's easier for me as a liberal to say that. But anyway, I just sort of wanted to maybe clarify that a little bit, or maybe I just confused it even more. Who knows? We'll find out.
I get you. And to clarify, the extent I need any clarification, I think my point would be that what we're talking about here is basic fundamental due process. When you're accused of something. And I think the point I tried to make, and maybe this didn't come across the airwaves, was that in many private businesses there is already some sort of enforcement mechanism out there, but that enforcement mechanism didn't exist for college students. And look, in my perfect world, these new rules would be unnecessary. Right. Because wise faculty members and administrators would say, we are committed to fundamental due process in any sort of disciplinary hearing that we have as part of our institution.
Yeah.
And therefore there would be no need for this. But that's not where we are. So here's the rules.
There we go. All right. So moving on, we talked about another thing we talked about last week on the show actually was the Michael Flynn case. And of course, we brought that up after the Justice Department requested that the charges against Flynn, to which he pleaded guilty, be dropped due to, in the Department of Justice's view, the fact that Flynn shouldn't have been interviewed in the first place, as well as what I guess they now see as an inability to clearly demonstrate that a crime was committed. And now this week, the judge presiding over the case, Emmett Sullivan, appointed a former federal judge, John Gleeson, to oppose the Justice Department's motion and to consider whether Flynn committed perjury, and not in line to the FBI. And Jay, you and others pointed out this last week that isn't a crime in and of itself, but rather whether or not he lied in his sworn testimony in court, and that would be perjury. And Judge Sullivan's also going to accept briefs from parties not directly involved in the briefs, in the case, our so-called amicus briefs, who believe that the charges against Flynn shouldn't be dismissed. So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is that some Republicans now are accusing top Obama administration officials, including Joe Biden,
Right.
of deliberately attempting to sabotage the, at that point, incoming Trump administration by unmasking foreign intelligence surveillance references, which, involved Trump administration officials. And that, of course, would include Michael Flynn. Now, Biden, along with most Democrats, argue that contrary to what these, what so-called Obamagate promoters claim, requests to unmask Americans that are part of foreign surveillance is pretty common. And the way the process works, they wouldn't have foreknowledge of who the masked people were. And it's also been pointed out that the Trump administration does a lot of unmasking itself, over 10,000 times in 2019, which is actually more unmaskings than in the last year of the Obama administration.
Right.
And then,
although a lot of those unmaskings were due to a lot of focusing on things like cybercrime, hacking, and so forth, and that sort of thing. So there was an increase in the collection of the data as well as sort of the unmasking in order, but that's
right. So,
a separate thing.
No, not me. I mean, it's fair to point out when you're just talking about numbers, not all unmaskings are potentially created
right.
equal.
And not all political. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
But,
And so then, though, later this week, Thursday, President Trump, just yesterday, said Congress should call former President Obama to testify on all this. And President Trump further claimed that this is all Obama, this was all Biden. These people were corrupt, the whole thing was corrupt, and we caught them. And then when he was asked what crime he believed President Obama committed, President Trump didn't say anything beyond some terrible things happened. And then he said specifically to the Washington Post, you know what the crime is. The crime is very obvious to everybody. All you have to do is read the newspapers, except yours. So there you go. A little shot at Jeff Bezos, Amazon, Washington Post, fake, failing media. Anyway, so Jay, a lot obviously going on here in this last week. What do you make of these latest developments, really starting wherever you want?
The first and foremost is the judge's appointment of a former judge to do exactly what, which is again, this is the word unprecedented is thrown around a lot these days, but I've never heard of a situation where the prosecution says we're going to drop the case, and then the judge says, well, maybe get somebody else who might want to prosecute something else. And hey, we'll open it up to comments. That to me is actually really very troubling. And I would think would be profoundly troubling to most anybody. The idea that he's sort of sitting as not only judge, but judge and prosecutor. So that's problematic. And there was actually a Supreme Court decision a week ago, and this was one of our sort of like backup stories, maybe to talk about if we had time, and of course we didn't because of all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But that was a unanimous Supreme Court case where the opinion was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, kind of smacking down the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals for doing the same sort of thing, albeit in the civil realm. Now, again, in the civil realm, it's even more well, I shouldn't say it was civil because but it wasn't the type of criminal prosecution of hey, you think this guy's guilty? So the court basically said, look, cases are between parties, and in a criminal case, it's between the state and the defendant. The judge isn't there to make law or to pursue anything else. They're there to umpire this dispute between the parties.
Let me ask you a question here, just to make sure I'm clear, because I agree with you that this is. I heard what Judge Sullivan. Is it Judge Sullivan? Is the name?
Yes.
Yeah, Judge Sullivan. Yeah, did, and I thought, wow, that's I'd never heard of that before. But another thing that I never heard of before is the federal government getting a guilty plea from somebody and then saying, oh, you know what? Never mind, actually. And so, to me, I get what you're saying. And I think we have a lot of unprecedented stuff. And this, to me, is why I understand why people on the right are troubled by this. I understand why people on the left are troubled by this. And I think the problem is not the problem necessarily, but the circumstances here are so unique and the stakes are so high that while I certainly acknowledged that what he did is unprecedented. I can understand that if I were a judge, a federal judge in this instance, that I might want to say, you know what, I'm going to take a step back here and maybe get some more information before I decide what exactly I want to do. If I want to say this guilty plea is tossed out and so forth. So I guess I'm not as troubled by it as you are in light of the circumstances.
Okay. Well, in terms of does this happen elsewhere, I'd say no, not often. The idea of the government taking, having a plea and then dropping the charges. But it does happen. I can't name names off the top of my head because most criminal convictions, and it doesn't involve the national security director. It involves some kid who has picked up selling drugs or something, right?
Sure.
But there are certainly plenty of incidents, and if pushed upon, I could go look some up where, years down the road, prosecutors find, based on whether it's DNA evidence or something else, that look, somebody confessed to a crime that they didn't actually commit in order just to, because they were confused, there was just too much pressure, there were other things going on, and in those cases, the cases are dropped and the person's restored to freedom. So yeah, it does happen, and that's sort of there is a very much a duty on the prosecution to always do justice, right? And if they look at this and say, look, I don't think there's a crime here.
Yeah.
There's a duty to not prosecute.
Yeah. And I wonder, I think there's another duty, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like there's duty for everyone involved in adjudicating this to ensure that if a plea is changed or if something is done, it's not to curry political favor or to, help out a superior or what have you, but it's done in the pursuit of justice. And I think that's what makes this case not a little bit, but a lot different from the drug dealer when new evidence comes up or something like that, or a guy was, coerced into pleading guilty, right. Though certainly there's an element of that in this for sure. And, more generally, G, I got to say, this is why I so much prefer to talk about policy as opposed to stuff like this, because, it feels like here in these kind of stories, there's so much we typically don't know. And you get a lot of argument by innuendos and a lot of cherry picking and all that sort of thing. And where most of us, not you and I, of course, because we're better than that, but where so many people on both sides start is from an assumption of corruption, illegality, and bad faith. And they just kind of work backward from that, saying, well, let's assume that Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in their, James Bond bad guy lair, or that, Adam Schiff did the same thing, who Adam Schiff has not had a good week, obviously. But I think that's a real problem. And I've been giving this a lot of thought in the last week because, of course, some of what we've seen.
You've come around since last week.
Well, I think I've said from the beginning that I'm going to try to stay away from the Michael Moore kind of stuff, that sort of stuff, which I didn't like when I was conservative. I don't like when I'm a liberal. And I'm trying to focus on official sources and documents, and I'm trying to go where they lead me. And on this, as you know, as we talked about last week, this led me to a position of a certain amount of skepticism for people like in the Obama administration. Depending, I don't know how high it goes. It's an important question, obviously, and certainly people like Adam Schiff, who it looks more and more like he misrepresented more than a few things in some of his statements. But here, I tried to kind of pull back and try to get a larger take on this. And here's what I came up with. And I want you to sort of jump in and right. But so the Obama administration, intelligence and law enforcement folks there, back in 2015, 2016, they were hearing a lot about how Russia was attempting to influence the elections. And specifically that Russia strongly preferred that Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. I think that's generally agreed on, right? Russia's interest and its interest on behalf of Donald Trump.
Yes and no. I might put a sort of I wouldn't say spin, but note that to some extent, Russia's bigger interest, I think, is just sowing chaos in the U.S.
Donald
system.
Trump is, if you want chaos, there you go.
Is prime for that, yeah.
No, and I'm not necessarily saying.
I think regardless of who is elected, their number one goal is is chaos because they like to be able to discredit the American system.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's not. I totally agree with that. And obviously, evidence of that or even claims about that, that's pretty serious. And you would want the intelligence community and law enforcement community to look into it. And given, I think, both the magnitude of the issue and I would say some bias against Trump, especially after he won the election, which, most people didn't think would happen, I think it's hard to deny that the investigators, at the very least, pushed the envelope in a way that everyone should find at least somewhat troubling, but also in a way that probably no one would have taken much issue with if there was actual evidence of collaboration between Russia and the Trump campaign, if that had been found.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So the next thing, though, is that they took a big risk. They took a big swing, but compelling evidence of collaboration just wasn't found.
Right.
And the Trump campaign and then the Trump administration, which, quite possibly is the most inexperienced administration in our lifetimes, maybe longer than that, Jay, they made some mistakes and possibly they even did some shady things. Is that fair to say?
Probably. I don't know. I guess I'd have to. Mistakes, absolutely.
Questionable
shady,
things. Questionable.
Yeah.
How about questionable decisions? How about that?
Questionable decision in things like Trump saying to Comey, I hope you can see clear to let.
Exactly.
That sort of thing.
Okay.
Which it may or may not, certainly could have the appearance of impropriety, even if it isn't.
Yeah. So giving President Trump the benefit of the doubt, President Trump, knowing that his campaign did not actively cooperate with the Russians and being famously sensitive about a lot of things, including his popular vote defeat, right? Just any idea that he didn't fairly win the election, he did what he always did. He shot out, overreacted, hunkered down, didn't cooperate at all. And
sure,
I think almost everyone knows that made things worse a whole lot. And that instinctive, you can't say that firing Comey didn't make things worse.
Oh, it made things worse. Yeah. But I also, once you're done, I could make very much an argument that, particularly in light of what we know now, it was the right decision.
Okay, yeah. And let me just say also that there were plenty of overreactions on the left, too. And I think, conservatives this week have been talking a lot, particularly because some documents came out about Adam Schiff misrepresenting facts and just being, I think at times it seems to me, just outright disingenuous of what he said he knew and could prove that doesn't seem to be supported by the documentation that we have. And I'm not saying folks on the left are going to jump all over me here. I'm not suggesting there's an equivalence here.
But why would they jump all over you? That's what I don't understand. I mean, because at this point we're talking about here's what the documents, here's what they said, and yeah. So.
I think they jump all over me because they might think that I'm saying that, well, both sides do it, and so I think that would be a false equivalence because I believe that far and away the biggest problem here is President Trump, not so much in the inexperience, or you could argue the incompetence. Actually, sometimes I think that works to the liberals' benefit, but in his reaction to the investigation and his contempt for the investigation. And I again, if he is not guilty of doing these things, and especially given his personality type, it would be bizarre to think he would react any other way. And that's my point, I guess. The larger point is that if we start with an assumption that Donald Trump is guilty, well, then he's just an awful, evil human being. But if we start with the assumption that he's not guilty, which I don't know, maybe you should give the President of the United States the benefit of the doubt when it comes to...
That's typically the way it works.
Yeah, well, especially when it comes to collaborating with the
especially
Russians.
When it comes to saying you're committing treason with one of our greatest strategic
exactly.
Enemies, not enemy may be strong, but historic rival, yes. Certainly a nation and a leader that doesn't have America's best interests at heart.
Yeah, and so, I mean... things like, for instance, people saying, well, what was Flynn doing talking with Kislyak in the first place? Well, that's a totally normal thing for an incoming national security advisor to do, and so it just feels to me like this is one of these situations that we already have a hyper-partisan environment. We have a guy who has a penchant for hyperbole and polarization in the first place. You throw that lighter fluid onto that polarized fire, and plenty of people on both sides were more than happy to just overreact in concert. And now we're at a situation where it's almost impossible. Everyone is so hunkered down in their positions that it's almost impossible for anyone to give even an inch of ground, and it's an awful place to be.
Well, part of this again is we can. I think one of the things that has handicapped a discussion on this, and it's a reason that you and I have not had this really a whole big discussion on these kind of things until fairly recently, is because we don't have a definite set of facts or documents or something to latch onto. It was all just sort of innuendo and, well, this could have happened, this might have happened, and speculation. But now we do. We don't have all of them yet. And the ones that are missing, that's sort of another story. Why don't we have those? But to me, the biggest trouble is, and you point out that, look, Trump's reaction to this, him knowing that he was innocent, and when I say innocent, I mean not guilty of colluding with the Russians to steal the election.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, he's done plenty of other goofy, dumb, shady, whatever. But certainly not guilty of being what he was charged with, or what was alluded to. But the irony is, so he acted that way knowing he was innocent. What we're learning now is, well, the prosecutors knew he was innocent too, and that's the big problem.
See, I think that's where you and I think part company a little bit. I think that the prosecutors didn't know that he was innocent. Now I think you can make a much stronger case that they knew Flynn didn't do anything wrong. But in terms of what the president knew and when he knew it,
all right, that's a fair distinction. But in the end, there was still certainly the FBI had ample reason to question the Steele dossier.
Yeah,
which was what it was basing so much of this on, what it based the Carter Page wiretaps on. And they did things that are so sleazy. I mean, that leaking the dossier evidence to BuzzFeed and then using BuzzFeed's reporting on it to take that to the court to say, look, see, this is happening. That's really disingenuous, and it's hard to ascribe something different than a political motive. The other thing I just wanted to touch on in this, because we're going to be talking about this for a while, I think, because there's going to be more documents coming out. There's going to be more stuff that's going to happen on this.
The main thing, Jay, of course, that you and I are both waiting at is the Durham report, that is supposed to be coming out, they think May or June. Well, they thought initially May or June, but now with everything, it might be later. And oh my God, can you imagine if it's, an October surprise, or, I mean, not a surprise, right. But, you hope it comes out before that, just so there's enough time to kind of process that, because that for me is going to be huge, because anyone who's being intellectually honest here knows that John Durham is not a partisan hack. I mean, it seems pretty. Again,
that presumption will evaporate when the report comes out.
And the same thing. This reminds me, the same thing with Attorney General Barr. I hear all this that he's carrying water for the president, that he's corrupt and so forth. But it seems to me that what's a lot more likely is that President Trump and his team, after Jeff Sessions, said, well, who should we pick as the next attorney general? Well, how about somebody who has a strong belief in executive prerogatives and executive power? And, who do we have? Who do we know who's like that, who has a good reputation? Yeah. Bill Barr. Okay. And when you work from, and that gets again to that presumption of bad faith, when you think about who Bill Barr is as a person, well, before this, a lot of things fit without having to posit him being corrupt. And that's the frustrating thing to me in all this, is there's so few people on either side are willing to start from that, as opposed to start from, well, obviously this guy's corrupt.
Yeah. Here's, I mean, something else that I look at also in terms of, maybe, I don't know if you want to say it's assessing credibility or assessing motives, but how hard does one side have to work to get its point across? If you read the motion to dismiss, it's really pretty straightforward, and I think most anybody who reads it would get it. That this goes to Flynn and say, listen, there's just no basis that we can come up with for one, the investigation that had the interview, and that he made a material misstatement that was material to the investigation of the crime that was being investigated, which ostensibly is the Logan Act, which I don't think anybody could really take seriously. So that's to me that's okay. So all of these people now who are calling for Barr's resignation and so forth, and the people who will be filing amicus briefs with Judge Sullivan, I guess the test I'm going to look for in that is, look, can you articulate what crime it is that Michael Flynn committed and why he should be charged with that crime? Setting aside even the fact that he probably would have been a mistrial because of the withholding of the Brady evidence and all that sort of thing. But if anyone out there, and I'll invite our listeners too, if you can articulate what it is what crime he committed, that I'd be interested in hearing, because that's the thing that I think the motion to dismiss sort of knocks out.
No, I agree. I mean, and I'm the last person who wants to see anything good happen to somebody who led a cheer of lock her up, at the convention there. But it seems to me that the fact that he said he was guilty doesn't really matter if there's not a crime, and he was basically coerced into doing it. So, we'll end your career, ruin your life, hurt your kids. But hey, it's your choice. Go ahead and do what you want. That's,
you can plead guilty, and you probably won't get any jail time. And exactly. I mean, what reasonable person wouldn't take that?
Absolutely. So,
one more thing that I want to.
Yeah, no, please.
This is because. This is something that is weird that has emerged from a lot of this stuff when you read all the exhibits, is that there appears to have been this weird belief in the Obama administration, and this goes to that January 5th meeting when they discussed Flynn and his phone call with the ambassador, that their excuse for why they believed there was collusion was because after the U.S. expelled a number of Russian diplomats over these things like the Facebook post and just the general interference, that Russia didn't take bigger retaliatory action against the U.S. And there seems to be this aha moment in this discussion with the president and others where they say, well, obviously the reason that they didn't take bigger retaliatory actions is because the fix is in. And to me, again, that's just baffling, right? I mean, and at best, and again, at this point, they have the taped phone call between Flynn and the ambassador, and I think Flynn says something even in his interview with the FBI about, well, I don't think I said go easy, but I had said you shouldn't escalate. Wasn't that something you'd hope anybody would say?
I mean, that's what that was my takeaway. Yeah. So what do you say? Oh, yeah, really? You should just screw you, buddy. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly.
To me, the proof would be, if there was collusion, would be that Flynn would say something like, you know what, you should really nail us hard, and I'll tell you, we're not going to do anything in return.
To me, Jay, the big thing here is, I mean, you know how I feel about Donald Trump. I haven't hidden it, but to me, the greatest threat here isn't from the president, as weird as that might sound to some people, because there's a spotlight on the president all the time, and the president is term limited and faces the voters. To me, the greatest threat is from an unchecked intelligence community, and they're the ones who are operating under the radar. And as I tried to point out last week, doing things like this all the time. And that's what we really need to look into, because if people think that this is just one isolated incident, that's incredibly naive. And if anything good can come out of this awfulness, I would think it would be just a complete and thorough investigation that I certainly hope we'll get, by the Durham report, but that's just limited to
That's FBI
and
justice,
Russia, but something just greater for the intelligence community in general, because that is a potential threat to Americans, no matter who's president, no matter what party's in charge. And
absolutely. And I would point out that there's a lot of things that are sort of alarming in that statements that Clapper and Brennan have made throughout this investigation, which, similar to Schiff, sort of implies that they know something that we don't, and there's something really bad, collusion here, and yet now that we're seeing the documents, it turns out they may not have been being truthful in those statements, and I think that's very much a problem in that. At any time through this, I mean, I think Brennan could have said something like, "Oh yeah, Carter Page, he's working for us. Don't worry. Yeah, that must have been, you know what I mean? But didn't. And that's, again, I agree with you. The unchecked intelligence agencies are I think, a greater threat than the threat that a president might somehow voluntarily agree to commit treason.
Yeah. And let's just hope that some sort of change, some sort of substantive change actually does come out of that. And we know, as I mentioned last week, there's a model for that happening. It happened in the 1970s with the CIA. And some, I think people would agree, some very real reforms were made. We don't overthrow nearly as many governments as we used to, So there's that.
Or they hide it better.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, but yeah, that's the problem. Anyway, so let's move on to we haven't talked about COVID a lot. And so, given the fact that earlier this week, House Democrats unveiled a $3 trillion COVID relief measure, that's, I think, worth talking about. Now, we're recording today's show, as I mentioned, Friday afternoon. A vote is expected sometime today, so we can't comment on the results. But what we can do is talk a little bit about what the package contains, if we think it's necessary, and why there's such strong Republican opposition to it. So to that first point, the key elements, and I should point out that Democrats, or some Democrats at least, originally wanted it to be $4 trillion, cut it back 25%. So, I don't know if you're going 3, you might as well go 4, I think. But hey, the key parts, nearly $1 trillion for state and local governments, an extension of unemployment benefits, another round of those $1,200 payments, $100 billion in rental assistance, $75 billion in mortgage relief, a significant expansion of the earned income tax credit and other low-income tax credit type programs, a $25 billion bailout of the Postal Service, and $3.6 billion for election security. Now, as I mentioned, some progressive House Democrats feel the measure doesn't go far enough. Then on the other side, Mitch McConnell's made it clear that this will not be approved in the Republican-controlled Senate, especially without anything about liability protection for businesses that reopened during the pandemic. So, Jay, first off, I guess, what do you think about this, and what do you see ultimately happening here?
Well, I guess what concerns me a little bit is we already have put out $3 trillion already. And it's not clear what effect that money has had in the economy yet. I think it will. It has to, right? Because $3 trillion is a lot of money. So I guess that would be my hesitancy. The other piece of this is the big issue for Republicans is this is not necessarily to bail out Americans who have lost their jobs, but it's to bail out state governments. State governments are absolutely hurting. For the same reason that everybody is. People aren't going to work, so they're not paying taxes, so they don't have revenue coming in, while at the same time they're getting hit by greater claims on things like an unemployment system. Some states' unemployment systems are better than others as far as their solvency, as far as all the actuarial assumptions and how much they need to keep going. That said, there are a lot of these big blue states, and Illinois is probably the best example, where you have states that have run up significant debt based on public pension liabilities that were existing before COVID and were going to exist after COVID. And now this is a sort of seen as a sop to, hey, we're going to bail out these states for expenditures not necessarily related to the present emergency, but related to the trouble they got themselves into in the first place. There's also sort of in kind of a reversal in some ways of the Obama tax or the Obama. What am I saying? Obama tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts. In that, the effect of that was to sort of steer away. You had a lot of folks in small towns, red state folks who were subsidizing the taxes in larger cities, and this sort of like, I guess, in its own way, undoes that in having these subsidies to the states. So, yeah, I guess I can't tell you whether $3 trillion is the right number or not, but it certainly is a big number.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I again, I'm hesitant. I've as Pelosi famously said, I mean, we'll know what's in the bill when after we pass it. But I think things that Mitch McConnell was talking about, like liability protection, are tremendously important, and I think you need that to move forward with business as much as you need any of these other things. The other piece of this is there a lot of this money. It doesn't always have to be government just gives you money. There are loans, and that's what the Paycheck Protection program was part of. You had loans administered through the SBA that could be forgivable to a certain extent if they're used for things like rent or payroll. But also, I mean, it's just, low bar. You can borrow now at a really low rate. And maybe the better way to do this is to allow parties to say, okay, you know what? Look, we're going to be a little late on this rent, but we've got some new money coming in from the feds. Hey, can we extend our lease term by another 3 months? And you just move it down the road. That there are ways to handle this without a direct federal subsidy or direct intervention. Well, I guess that would be sort of the Republican answer, especially after what what has been done already.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes and no. I agree that there are other ways to do it. The problem is administratively, they're a lot trickier,
right.
Given that the system's already overwhelmed, and you have people
weren't prepared for this. Because,
exactly, and you have people who are gonna be out of a place to live, and that's a real problem now, especially. So that's really.
I mean, I think that may depend on a state to state.
Sure.
I know here in Ohio we have sort of a moratorium on any sort of shouldn't say any kind of evictions, because there are some things that are still proceeding. Yeah. But I mean, the state has, the Supreme Court has ordered, hey, courts, you're not going to hear anything on these, typical debt collection, eviction type proceedings until August at the earliest.
But and that's part of the problem is, I'm for loans. I think make sense in a short term situation, but when you have a situation where the amount that you're going to need to just stay afloat gets so high that even at zero interest, trying to pay that back becomes essentially impossible, because if you're not going to get back that money, from some other revenue source, then you can't really ever pay back. And that's, I think, where we're getting at. I think, Jay Powell, the chair of the Fed, earlier this week said, we're doing trillions of dollars worth of stuff, but hey, it's probably not going to be enough. And unless we go much bigger on the fiscal policy side of things, that we could be looking at a really serious longer term type of thing. And I think his point was we need to spend some now. And President Trump actually seems to be in favor of this, saying, interest rates are at a historic lows and all that sort of thing. Yeah. So, but
if you're going to do it, this is the time to do it. And I completely get the. And as you remember a couple of weeks ago, I mean, I sort of said we're all modern monetarists now.
Yeah.
And there was a magazine or a paper that started a story with that line.
I recall that. Yeah.
But
I was going to say, on the thing with the states, I understand. I agree that it would be wrong for, say, a state like, by the way, one of the states by far the worst pension system. I think we're right up there with Illinois, with blue state Illinois is red state Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's own state, and he seems to forget to mention that. But has a horribly messed up pension system, and I think it would be wrong for any state, red or blue, to try to get money out of the federal government to use for non-COVID things. But
Right.
I
Never
also
let a good crisis go to waste, though.
but I also think that it's totally reasonable to give states grants to deal with the direct costs of the pandemic, which I would include paying government employees, because keeping people in their jobs is central to so much, and also
Agreed.
for funds to compensate for the loss of tax revenue due to the pandemic. Now, anything other than that, I think, is asking too much, actually. So I don't think that you and I necessarily disagree a whole lot on that.
Right. And again, it would be matters of degree and on specifics that we don't really know yet for sure, because we don't have a final product to look at yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on the liability issue, I want to say that I'm kind of confused by some of the arguments on the left, actually, because it seems to me that liability protection is a reasonable ask depending on how it's written. I mean, what we don't want to do is put businesses in a situation where, well, you got to open to stay afloat, but if you do open up, you're now exposing yourselves to lawsuits that could close you. So, I mean, it's the same thing with people. We have to protect people too, but I think there's a compromise here. I think there can't be a broad waiver of liability for businesses that do things like, say, require employees to not wear masks, which some businesses are doing, reports are, or businesses that don't provide masks and other, PPE to workers, or that don't take reasonable steps to ensure things like, sanitized surfaces and stuff like that. And if your business can't open under those conditions, then you shouldn't have liability protection. But if you can do those things, to me, a short-term liability provision that's nationwide, so you don't have to worry about all these, different state laws and processes, I think that goes a long way to helping us get back up on our feet. So it seems strange to me to just say, no, we're not going to do that at all. We're going to put workers first, because I don't see it as an either or thing. We need to lift up workers and businesses. And if we don't do that together, we're just asking for trouble, I think.
Yeah, I think there are ways to certainly draft bills, and there are plenty of states considering bills. Ohio, I'm pretty familiar with that there are two versions right now that are moving through the legislature, and essentially both say that there would be immunity, but it's a qualified immunity, and it wouldn't apply in the cases of intentional or reckless or egregious. And those are all terms that are then defined in the bill.
Yeah.
And as well as, they're taking the definition from the common law. The types of someone who is willfully ignorant or uncaring, that sort of thing, you would not be subject to the liability or for the liability protection. And I think it's just a matter of writing that way.
But so it seems to me here that both sides are just sort of in their negotiating posture, and that there are some pretty obvious compromises that are available on both sides. And I think that will happen. I mean, I think it's probably going to be it might even be early June before it happens, but I'm fairly confident that we're going to see a third bill. I think it's going to be multi-trillions, maybe not 3, maybe more like 2, and that it will include some liability protection as Republicans want, as well as some limitations on how states can use that money for things like, can't use it for things like bailing out pension plans and so forth.
Yeah.
So you
I think that's right. Yeah.
All right.
Although, I mean, again, I think that, something you learn in finance and state finances, all money is fungible. So,
that's a good point.
Putting limitations on you can't use it for this. Well, okay, there's ways around that.
Well, and I get that.
That may just have to be as I think the analogy I used a couple weeks ago is, look, the house is on fire, so your you're using the fire hose.
Yeah,
and
there's
you're
going to be
gonna
some water
probably
damage.
Spray a whole lot
Yeah.
of stuff that you you don't mean to spray or don't want to under ordinary circumstances, but this is where we are.
Yeah, and that's an issue we haven't talked about, but we'll be talking about for a long time in the future. Is the fraud investigations and prosecutions that are going to come out of this? Boy, this talk about an Attorney Protection Act if we ever needed one. Because oh my God, this can you imagine?
Thank goodness. Yeah.
You're safe.
Well,
man.
no, and I would put out there that to some extent, that's a reason why I like sort of the loan approach a little better than just a federal shelling out money, because I think there is sort of a easier to enforce and more incentive to enforce
Right.
when you're talking about private loans from private banks tracking down fraud.
Yeah, I think that's not an unreasonable point. You know, the other point, the Postal Service bailout, I'm actually in favor of that, because right now is not the time to try to tell the Postal Service just to fix what you're doing and renegotiate your contracts and all that. But I think that sometime after we have successfully deployed a vaccine, so maybe summer of 2021, I would hope that there would be pretty significant deregulation of the Postal Service so it can actually operate like a business and not end up in this situation again. And you know, maybe that means even largely privatizing it. And for people who get up in arms about that, there are plenty of countries in Europe, which far more socialist in other ways, that have done that. And, you know, reasonably, it's been fairly successful. But so I think this is not the time to tell the Postal Service to go to hell, but certainly some changes need to be made. But this is not the time to just let the Postal Service just wither away, basically, I think.
Well, I think you're speaking the truth there on a lot of these things, where about changes could be made to the postal service so that it could be more competitive and relevant. Because here's the thing: look, it's not as if there aren't companies out there delivering stuff to everybody all the time, every day.
Yeah.
It's just this one that's state run can't keep up. So yeah, I'm with you there. As far as do they need to be bailed out right now, I guess I just look in terms of priority as far as when we say bailed out.
Say kept afloat.
If we are going to bail out somebody, again, I'd prefer that, one that we do through loans and not just straight out bailouts. But second, if you are, then I'd prefer to see private businesses bail out small businesses as opposed to a big federal bureaucracy. But
well,
again,
I think
let's put it this way: how many million for the post office? $3 billion.
It was 25 billion.
25 billion. Well, that is a lot.
Yeah, and they for a long time now, I think for several decades, they've had an open $15 billion line of credit. Congress passed that in some a modernization or whatever, some kind of postal act. But that's pretty much totally tapped out right now. So yeah, but I think really it's the worst of both worlds. It's like combine the worst aspects of a government bureaucracy and the business, and you get the Postal Service. And that's no way to run anything, I think. So it needs to be more one or the other. And either way I think you can make it work, and we know models that it works. But this sort of hybrid model is just clearly, I mean, the books don't lie. This model does not work, and it needs to be changed.
Yep.
All right. Well, we've had a lot of agreement on this episode. Very, very, very weird, I think. I don't know. It's like, but that's nice for a change, actually. I appreciate that. Let's kind of move on, and we're kind of running a little long, but talk about maybe some non-political or semi-non-political things that we might recommend this week. I'll start with you, Jay.
Okay. Well, this was the recommendation that I was going to make last week. But we ran out of time.
Yeah, we totally forgot to do it.
And you actually referred to this a couple of times when we were talking, is The Good Place, which I've been binge watching on Netflix. It is by the creator of The Office and Parks and Rec, and I told someone maybe the best show ever. So I highly recommend that. It's very smart, very clever, and asks some actually pretty serious questions, that makes you think. So anyway, that's my recommendation.
Well, I got a couple things. One,
I should I feel like I should be recommending something more highbrow than just
not at all
on Netflix. But these are such are the times we're living in.
No, not at all.
I'll go back to like highbrow. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt. I'll recommend one thing kind of related to our last story. I'm late to the game on this, but I just only recently discovered the Facebook page UPS Dogs, and it is one of my favorite things in the world. It's basically, UPS drivers take pictures of the dogs that they give treats to and pet and so forth, and it makes me happy.
And I was concerned my Good Place thing wasn't going to be highbrow enough.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, you're way up there actually. So it's just a little fun thing that I look at every day, and it makes me smile because dogs are awesome. Also, I'm binge watching something as well. I'm binge rewatching NYPD Blue, which I watched back in the day, and I'm totally, completely addicted. Kimberly left that party a while ago, and now it's just every spare minute I have because I'm so burned out from the end of the semester. That's what I do. I plop down, spend a good 40 minutes with Andy Sipowicz and company and the 15 Squad, and I am a happy guy. So that, and of course, I'm still working on my book. Thanks to Phil, especially a big thanks to you, Phil, and everyone else who's been helping me out with that. And I put the link there in the show notes. I've been a little slow in doing stuff this week just because it's been finals week, but I will be adding on to some chapters, and I really appreciate your comments and suggestions. So thank you very much for that. Okay. Well, that's it for today's show, but we have so much more we want to talk about. We want to talk about the Supreme Court and faithless electors, big case this week. The Supreme Court and Donald Trump's tax returns and financial records, a big case this week. Justice Clarence Thomas just losing his shit and talking like a maniac and making Lord of the Rings references. Oh, my God. So much to talk about, and we are going to talk about all of that on the supporters exclusive show that airs midweek. So if you're interested in that, it's patreon.com/politicsguys to become a supporter. And again, remember, if you can't afford to, send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com. I'm more than happy to get you set up. And of course, we also would appreciate it if you could subscribe to the show, leave ratings and reviews, and especially share on social media. If you want to get in touch with us, mail@politicsguys.com. There's our bipartisan politics subreddit, which I've been awful about being on the last couple of weeks. Again, the last couple of weeks of the semester, I just turned into survival mode, but I'm going to be back on it much more. Thanks to everyone who's kind of taking up all the slack there. Also, we've got a Facebook page where we post stuff, facebook.com/politicsguys page, and we are on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilmer Moreno, Andra Masker, Daniel Toe, and Chris Wilkerson. Today's show was produced by me, Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show next week. We hope you'll join us.